Mic is so much better. There it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have. Oh, mine is not working.
Wonder she has. Can you speak into it?
Fine, we have like 7 mics here. Okay, good. I think yeah, I have it. Okay, so as I mentioned before, people are still setting it up. We're also streaming live this conversation. And in the meantime, I would like to mention we have a masterclass with Eva tomorrow morning. Would you like to say a few words about that? No. Can we can we have a proper mic?
Yeah, not the wired ones.
Yeah.
This one.
Untangled in mics.
The masterclass tomorrow. It's a strange way to start. It's a masterclass. I actually don't even want to call it a masterclass because I don't feel like a master of anything specifically, but it's a sort of a sharing session about process. And I will be, I sort of constructed it around this essay by Derrida around secret cinema and the idea of a specter, which seems to appear and reappear throughout my work. So if that sounds interesting, you should come on by.
Yeah. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. Okay. So hello everyone. Welcome to the Q&A for Aleph. Eva is here. Thank you for sharing this film with us. It's a wonderful gift to the world and to all the people who are touched by this work. I just want to start by, I mean, we can begin with the inspiration for this project. And of course, the short story, the Aleph by Borges is there, but I'm sure you have many other sources. And I'm also interested personally, how did you arrived to the Aleph? Because you also lived in so many places, you've traveled, you are connected to so many cultures. And I'm wondering, where did your search met all these other inspirations? Like, if you can go for it.
Okay, so to start from the beginning, thank you all for coming and for staying and for choosing this film. I also just want to say that this is another special aspect of this is that Anne Waldman, who is the narrator of this film, a poet and an incredible human, and also the co-founder of the Europa Institute here, is here with us tonight as well. And very grateful to her for being our sort of grand dreamer, which I'll talk about later. How did I come to this film? My first film that I made was, first feature film, was about, it's a lyrical essay that's about migrants, refugees, asylum seekers on the island of Cyprus, where I grew up. And it was a film that was very much about division, borders, separation. And after a few years of sort of, after years of making it and then also years of traveling with and talking about it, the idea of living in that world started being sort of feeling very heavy as a reality. And I wanted to make something that was the very opposite of that, something that's sort of connecting, that's unifying, that allows us, this creates a kind of a pluriverse rather than a universe, which is what Borges talks about, in which we can all sort of exist and, yeah, just like be in, live in a glorious way. And so I knew that it was going to be, all my films tend to be fragmented in a way because of what you described, which is a sort of, I come from Yugoslavia, and Yugoslavia is a country that had a civil war. And so it was sort of displaced when I was 11 years old. And so the life sort of becomes fragmented. And so the films start to take this shape, fragmented, it's sort of unified into some kind of a whole. So I knew that this film was also going to be that. And I had been making, prior to my first film, I had been making these short films that are sort of collections of all these different places that I inhabited, whether, through these movements or through work or whatever. And as I was speaking to friends, they were sort of starting to see some kind of thread. And multiple people were suggested, like, well, there's something in this sort of short form that's sort of starting to make sense as a continuation of each other. And I started to sort of look into that, and it was also my favorite way of making things. And I knew that, so I knew there was going to be a collection of stories, but I didn't know what kind of a container it would take or what kind of a theme it would follow. And then I met with my friend Rodrigo, as the sort of beginning suggests. And Rodrigo was, started sort of philosophizing about what he sees in my work and so on. And said, these are little snippets of universes. And I feel like he gave me 2 tasks. He said, you should read Borges, Aleph, Borges' Aleph, and you should also watch The Phantom of Liberty by Buñuel. So as a good student, I went and did both of those things. And of course, after reading Aleph, everything sort of fell into place. And I went into a sort of deep dive, not just into Aleph, but into the whole world of Borges, and read, almost everything there was to read. And yeah, it's just sort of built a sort of mythology, his motifs. The film takes form of a labyrinth, which is one of his motifs. We enter the labyrinth in Argentina, which is the land of Borges. And we sort of run through the labyrinth, meet different people who lead the way out. And out is where Aleph is. It's when we find Aleph, this point in space and time that contains the entire universe. So.
Okay, maybe some of the people here were wondering while watching, is this truth, as you actually asked at one point, and that's such a perfect timing for that question. Because I think you are wondering, are these people acting? Are these stories truth? How much is fiction? How much is documentary? If you can talk about this, how do you see, the connection between documentary and fiction, and how does it work in this work?
Yeah, I mean, one lives in the other one lives in the, it's like Camila was saying earlier. I don't really distinguish between the two, but if I was to sort of describe the process of how it went down, I don't feel comfortable with representation. So none of these people are, except for one, there are different performers acting out the stories. So for example, I would go to Argentina and I would meet different people and I would collect stories, real stories. And then I would take those stories, particularly in Argentina, it was 4 different women. And I wrote it into one character. And then one of the women performs the story. And it's not her unique story. It's sort of like a combination of things. And then so it goes as the film goes. But it really depends. For example, in New York, Jarko, the man who happened to kill 2 people, that was his own story. And he actually is a famous actor in Yugoslavia, then Yugoslavia, now Serbia. This is a thing that really happened, and he was very protective of his story. And so we worked together to sort of write. He also wrote a book, so a lot of that was lifted from this book. Otherwise it's performers who are performing other people's stories or a collection of things. Whether it's true, it's true. With Mama, for example, in Algeria, again, we traveled throughout, and this is something that if you come to the masterclass tomorrow, we're going to show this film that's a process film of making that section. We interviewed men all over Algeria because, the way that the story was sort of progressing was that we would follow people's dreams. So in Argentina, the woman had a dream that she was sailing to the coast of Algeria. And there she found a man who had something to tell her. And so in Algeria, we were looking for a man of a specific age who would tell us something about contentment. So we went throughout Algeria, interviewed, I don't know how many people, a lot of people, and then built this character. And then, of course, when we found Boy Mama after many different trials, we molded, because he's not an actor, we molded the story to, so these likes and dislikes and sort of his characteristics to suit his actual person. So yeah, so each segment would have its own sort of peculiarities, but whether it's true, it's true.
I mean, the feelings are true. um, yeah, I was thinking while watching. I mean, you bring so much poetry, visual poetry, music, dreams, and jumping from one place to another, traveling. And I was thinking, film is the perfect medium for that. It's such a great medium to be transported right away, right? And to make these connections. And I'm wondering what film, the medium of film, does to you, and if you want to expand to other media or mediums, um, or if you feel that film helps you tell everything you would like to say.
Yeah, I actually started as a visual artist, as a painter, illustrator, and I couldn't express myself in that medium then. And film sort of came to me as a way that I could actually say some things. For now, that may change, but I mean, it's some kind of a perfect conglomeration of all the arts, right? Of poetry, of literature, of music, of photography. And as that, it gives you so much space to build worlds and to exist in different ways. So it's really like a incredible playground. And so for me, because this is a really, let's face it, a strange film, right? It's not, it's not linear. It's not following any one character. There's no sort of a hero story, no arc. So I'm interested in actually introducing new ways of being in this cinema world. Yeah, and as that, I mean, I'm sort of like at the same time perhaps alienating people because it's a very specific way of seeing, looking, being in a place. But yeah, I'm slowly transitioning into other things. I'm getting back into illustration and painting. But I think it's just a matter of the moment. Whichever medium speaks to the moment of my expression, right? Like maybe there was a time where, when I was a kid, I was a really shy kid, so I couldn't really talk, and especially because as you lose your language and develop new languages, communication becomes a bit. So then film became the only way that I could actually express things, and that will change. I think it will, it will turn into something else because maybe I don't want to use words. I want to use something else. Yeah.
Also, you mentioned that the process is very important, and you want the process to be perceived while watching the film. So, and also you refer to your protagonists as co-creators. If you can talk a little bit about how did you arrive to these specific people? Why did you choose them? And something about the process of working. You can choose one or two that you feel relevant.
Well, the process was always going to be very, very loose, in the sense that the film was sort of led to serendipity and chance. But within that, I gave myself very specific constraints. So I would have a month to 5 weeks in each place. And during that time, I would have to find a story, find a person who will perform, and then also film it. the meetings were very, again, serendipitous, right? And of course, those meetings have to do with my own state of mind and sort of like whatever is going on inside. That those are the people that I attract in the moment. So, for example, those four women that I met, who the commonality was sort of this lack of feeling, was something that I was feeling at the time. And then, of course, the collaboration becomes this sharing of stories and this, let's say, commonality of experience. And then the other part was that we didn't know where we were going, right? We didn't know any new location. Everything was dictated by the people that I
So
was
everything
meeting.
was written as
Yeah,
it
as
was
I was
happening,
just sort of
like-
unveiling. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the authority is also sort of given to the people in the film to dictate what the path is. And also, like, I can't come up with all these things by myself. This is like a combination of all these meetings and thoughts and ideas. And of course, when we're talking about books and poetry and we're talking about Ama and Banu Kapil, right? All of sort of poems, books, everything that you read along the way makes it into the into the final thing.
Yeah, there are so many references. You bring so many artists through references, and I also, maybe you can talk about this. I mean, having Anne being your narrator, I'm sure it was on purpose and amazing in collaboration here. Also, some references to Jim Jarmusch. To me, the trip on the boat felt very Apichat Pong, like that spoke to me. Very cool. Yeah, there are a lot of references, and not only to filmmakers, or also the music that you bring in, the poems. You mentioned the questions, the likes and dislikes that are happening in Algeria. So if you can talk about all this.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, again, like I go to a place and I'm sort of prepared to do a deep dive into wherever I'm going, and that also means like digging through music, digging through museums, books. So I come like fully ready to just immerse in everything that's there. And I also come with sort of some, again, serendipitous things that were given to me or offered to me. So, for example, in Argentina, I was reading Luis Borges, the late Luis Borges, who I met at Naropa. And I based some of the ways that she structures those sentences on his style of, let's say, poems. And then it was him who brought to my attention this piece by Roland Barthes, and it's a piece that lists all his likes and all his dislikes. And then I used that strategy for the character in Algeria, right? So I just like sort of like I don't know, opening yourself up in a way that ideas just come through. Um, I just it was such a really great way to explore and create, because it was extremely free, and also just following a kind of like a tuning in that's very present. And I know that we don't often get the chance to make films in this way, because films like this, let's face it, not really funded or distributed or anything like that. So it was a huge privilege to actually be able to do that.
And some freedom. There's some freedom with that comes with that, right? So which can be wonderful. I feel like this film is a sort of a opening the door to something that is not seen so often. And to me, the film is Aleph. The film is the portal to this world, and has this power to connect humans in all these places and find those commonalities between us. So
I'm just going to say one more thing to refer to Anne also, which is Borges has this idea that the entire universe was created by a grand dreamer, and that dreamer only allows us little snippets of the universe, sort of into the higher realm. And so this grand dreamer, would come in and out and sort of guide the way to Aleph. And then, of course, this grand dreamer became Anne, which I'm very grateful for, that she sort of connected to those ideas and things. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say about that.
yeah. I would like to open up to the audience if there are any questions. I'm sure there are. You ask so many questions that uh, it's wonderful that actually there's so much to talk about.
Sometimes there's a digestion period that needs to happen.
Yes, yes. And I love that your production company is called Diva Asks.
Yeah, it's based on these short films that I have been making.
Yeah, I know.
Mhm.
Which one?
My question is very simple. What equipment did you use to do the filming, and how large was your crew in most places? I'm curious about the mechanics of the work.
The crew was always very small. It was always a local crew. So in Argentina, it was an Argentinian crew. In Algeria, it was an Algerian crew. And these were incredible crews, really. The only person that was following me around was the cinematographer for consistency reasons, and also, just accessibility of equipment and so on. And he shot on the F7, Sony F7, and he used these fancy Russian lenses of his that he's very proud of, and he's a great DP. So, but they were very small. It was, myself, the DP. Um, it would be sometimes a camera operator, sometimes an AD if we're lucky, and we had some incredible ADs in Algeria, for example, a sound person, of course. So maybe like 5 or 6 people. Depending on the maybe South Africa, the last part was the biggest, but still maybe 7, 8 people, something like that. I also get very distracted if there's a lot of people on set, so I prefer smaller things. Yeah.
And sometimes you shot things yourself, like the eyes, right?
Yeah, sometimes I had to shoot myself. One, Jimmy couldn't go to a monastery, for example, and I stayed there for 7 days. And then for other reasons in Mexico, for example, with the eyes, it was a budget issue, so I shot them myself. Yeah, and then there are also instances, for example, in Argentina, where he came in the last week and he shot everything that had to do with the character, but then I did all the other stuff, the town, the sort of scenes, in the parks and all that stuff. So yeah, it's something between budget, accessibility, intuition.
I didn't catch whether it was video or 16 or 8 or 35
Video.
video.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Such a beautiful film. Thank you for sharing with us. And I have many questions, but I'll just ask two. One, could you talk to us a little bit about the process of the sound design? Because I felt like that was such a powerful element in the storytelling. One example, the death, the man falling from the building, and the screen goes to black, and the sound of the body hitting the ground, and how powerful that was. And then also, was that Caleb Lindsay? Who? No, I was like, it's not, but it is.
What did you think that was?
The two men who were the same men having a conversation, asking each other questions.
Oh yeah, no.
Do you know
Desire.
Caleb Lindsay, the
No.
performance artist and experimental filmmaker? It felt like him, so I thought that was okay. So maybe just the sound design would be great.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Sound is one of the most important aspects of a film. I also obsess a little bit about not only sounds, but for example, in Argentina, we had I discovered this composer whose name is Mauricio Kagel, and he did these compositions where he would use, he would tear paper, he would throw things, and those became the compositions. So I used that as the soundtrack of that first part, and so a lot of it is driven by these sort of like weird sounds that are creating the beat or the rhythm. That is not exactly music, but not exactly sound design either. And then, of course, that first part is very sort of exaggerated. So I, was adding these sounds of to recreate a kind of an emotion or a feeling that happened without having those images or and then of course there's some themes, right? Birds come in and out of each segment. Birds come in as a sort of theory in general, that they transport you to another world and so on. So that became like an important thread. And then music, of course, and music to me is a sort of like another language or a texture. I'm a bit of a music freak. Every time I go somewhere, the first thing I do is go record digging in record stores. So yeah, I just find these really obscure pieces, and then my producer gets very angry because like, how are we going to clear the rights for this, and who is this person, and so on. But it actually worked out really well. She did amazing. She found and was able to secure all those things. And then there's other things like, Lamonte Young is an experimental composer who believed that there's a universal hum in the world. And so all of his compositions have this kind of like a continuous hum. And so we use that in the film, and it's actually miraculous that he gave us rights, because he's never given rights for his music. So yeah, so all the sort of textures start to build a sort of the sonic landscape. I laid out some initial things, and of course, I used terrible sound effects that download from the internet. And then my sound designer is like, "These are terrible. What were you thinking?" And then, of course, then he goes and recreates them in Foley. And then, of course, he has his own ideas of what should happen. Like he created really beautiful echoes in some of those labyrinthian shots. Yeah, and I love working with this guy. Like the best thing for me is to go into a sound studio and play with sound and elevate the entire world by this sonic landscape atmosphere. Yeah, and I'm always pleasantly surprised by what the sound designer will come up with based on my sort of suggestions. Yeah, his name is Leandros Dunis. He's in Greece. You should all use him.
Tea drinking, brewing and drinking tea was a wonderful image that seemed to be a thread or something that was continuous in almost every location. And when I saw the tea being poured, or
You wanted to go to the bathroom?
no, no, I felt like it was taking me into like a deeper level of consciousness or subconscious. Kind of like you wanted us to go deeper into what was happening. Is that anywhere near close to what you had in mind for the tea?
Yeah, that's a good observation. I mean, so it's twofold. One is that tea and coffee drinking is the recurring thing in all the cultures, right? Every culture has a tradition of tea or coffee or so on. And then the other thing that this, again, I edit my own films, but then I get stuck, and then I bring in reinforcements. So my friend Sarah came on for about 2 weeks, and then she said, "Okay, tea drinking," the same way that you said tea drinking, and she said, "We're gonna do an Alice in Wonderland kind of thing where we sort of weave you in through different shots," and the same she suggested with this protagonist from the last bit, Desire from South Africa. So we interspersed that person throughout. So yeah, it was supposed to create some kind of a hypnotic looping, and also maybe a way of places to talk to each other, as a kind of a commonality or community between all of them. Yeah, I'm glad that happened. I'm glad that it worked.
Thank you so much for sharing that film. It was really beautiful and mesmerizing. I have a lot of feelings right now and not that many cohesive thoughts, but I'm thinking about how you introduced the film, and we're talking about not trying to make sense of it and to sort of go along with the ride. I'm curious about your process and your practice and the tension that might exist between surrender and control, and maybe how you navigate that in your personal life if it feels connected to your art practice.
Surrender and control. Surrender and control. I would say that I think in the filmmaking, I surrender much more. Is that true? Is that true? I don't know. Maybe it's like a fine balance, depending on what it is. But in this film, it was definitely a lot of surrender. Also because there was stuff that I really couldn't control, right? Like the time limit, I couldn't control. Sometimes, and you'll see tomorrow also when we screen this process film, some people that would like to be in the film, they don't want to be in the film, and then I have to move on and find different things. So there's a lot of sort of like letting go of your initial ideas and reassessing. And in life, I would say the same, except that maybe I get a little, maybe I get a little too much into my rituals sometimes. Like if I have rituals in the morning and that pattern is, disrupted, and I get cranky. It's not good. But in filmmaking, I think I can let go. Yeah. And sometimes you see from the short films, they're really not polished. They're quick. They're little snippets of things, because I'm not really interested in imperfection at all. I don't think it's a human trait. And so I'm interested in what comes out of this imperfection. Yeah, and this film, like you said earlier, is not perfect. We're not about your film. Yeah, I'm just reiterating the thought. So yeah.
Well, thank you for the film. It was beautiful. I spent part of my time explaining the Aleph at the Spanish department. I wish you could have been there. One thing that I would like to mention is, she was saying surrender. I think you put us in a stage of surrender ourselves, not only to the discovery of dream, but also the discovery of all these emotions that taking us to all these different cultures we experience, and is of course the pleasure of discovery, but it's the pleasure of being taken by the possibility of dreaming and the possibility of creating worlds that is all connected by the beauty of different disconnections. You did a master work, and I thank you.
I agree.
That's a really beautiful thing to say. Thank you for that. It really makes me happy that you experienced it that way. You're making me emotional, so I'm not gonna.
I have a comment and a question. I was thinking about whether the film was driven by the words or the images, and it seemed very well balanced. The words created the words were more like ideas, but there was always text to read, which uses a different part of my brain. And you visualized in ways that were as elusive as the way the words were used as ideas. You had to think very experimentally in the way that you shot. I remember the high shots in the beginning of the film, and then the sound image work when, I don't know what country it was, but the man with the hat was sitting at a table with the lady, and then suddenly they were talking, but they weren't talking. And those were really intriguing. So the images, as well as the words, took me out of thinking I was understanding and forced me to give in to your dream.
Also beautiful comment. Yes, I have this innate tendency to get away from the indexical. And then that becomes what you described, which is images and text that don't necessarily relate to each other or relate to each other in a way that's a little bit off. And what that does in my mind is create a kind of a third space of something new that's possible. And again, what we're going to talk about is tomorrow, but it's this kind of like the fact that everything that's visible contains in itself an invisibility, and everything that's invisible contains in itself a visibility. And so putting these things together, sort of juxtaposing them, creates this third meaning, right, or a third space. I was reading an essay. It was an essay about sound, and her name is Salome Vogel. Yes, thank you. That's why we have Tom around, because he's the brain of the
Yes,
operation.
he's the brain of everything.
And she was talking about echoes, and she was talking about echoes which produce obviously a certain emotion, sound thing. And then between the echoes, there is a silence. And that silence is the space of possibility, where something new can happen. And so for me, this kind of like disconnect it creates that kind of a silence where something else, a new world can arise.
Sure. I also wanted to compliment you on John Cage reference, and I felt like that was happening throughout. His use of sound and thoughts to make you present and aware by stopping you from taking things literally. And you were doing that too.
I'm going to make you happy with another John Cage reference. So the last bit in South Africa with Desire, who is an incredible artist, performer, human also, we used, there's an essay that John Cage wrote. Actually, he didn't write it. It was a lecture he gave. And in this lecture, instead of giving a lecture, all he did was ask questions. So the entire lecture is based on questions. So it's basically saying, we are sitting here, and as we are sitting here, aren't we thinking? And as we are thinking, aren't we also seeing each other? And as we are seeing each other, and so everything just keeps going and going. And I really love this because so many things start to arise from that process of questioning. And I use that as a strategy for Desire to talk to Desire, as this sort of like back and forth questioning. And we came up with those questions because I literally gave Desire a set of questions, and then they answered back to me, and we turned those into, so it became like a dialogue. But yeah, John Cage.
Thank you so much for this film, and the process sounds really extraordinary and collaborative and co-creative. I'm curious if you can share more about how you and your collaborators sort of navigated that line between the power and the truth and universalism and humanism, and on the other hand, sort of cultural and historic specificity of each of the regions and locations.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one of the things that we had in our canon was language. Both I and my DP speak multiple languages, so we're able to actually at least enter in that way, which is a really big step. The other part was that we had local crews, so everything we did ran through the local crew, right? Even in Algeria, for example, when Obama comes to camera and he sort of claps, my thing was like, well, he's going to come to the camera and he's going to do this. And they're like, we don't do that here. That's not our gesture, right? So everything was sort of checked through the people that we're working with. For the most part, it was a really, really beautiful experience. And because yeah, when we tried to put people in a space where everybody was a co-creator, like I would have a production assistant, and we would be in the middle of filming in Nepal, and he would say, don't you think we should say this in this line, because before you reference stars and this is a perfect moment? And I'm like, of course. So it's things like this that sort of weave into each other. And in Nepal, for example, at the beginning we had a bit of a weird thing, because everybody, I'm generalizing, but this is what was told to us by the part of our crew. People over 35 tend to go the more traditional route, and people under 35 are much more sort of cosmopolitan. They're on Instagram. They're these young sort of hipsters and so on. And so there was a moment where I said, there are too many of us on set. Could we maybe everybody's gonna get paid still, but maybe we just need less people, especially because we were working with two girls, two women, and there was some sort of like sensitive scenes or whatever that we wanted to be. And then the next day would come and everybody would show up. And I said, did I not communicate something, or was it, And then they explained to us that in the culture, there's something about breaking of the equilibrium, right? And if people didn't show up on set, that would break the equilibrium, regardless if they get paid, regardless of anything. And it took a few days to understand that. We were really, I was like, wow, I there's something I'm doing really wrong because I'm not communicating. And once that was communicated to us, I said, okay, that makes perfect sense. Everybody stays, and maybe we'll just go to a different room or something. So yeah, I mean, it's just it's a really beautiful exercise of being aware all the time. And of course, we all have blind spots, and again, we'll talk about this tomorrow, but learning through those blind spots is also such a huge reward. And I feel like everybody, this is not like patting myself on the back, but everybody after the film told us that it was a very special experience. So that made me very happy. There's a lot of love. Silence.
Okay. Any other questions? Maybe? I'm wondering about that eye scene that for me is very powerful, and it comes right after the boat, right after the ghost talk. And I see your reflection in most of the eyes and other people's reflections, and I don't know, I find it very powerful. Again, that iris feels like that portal to a world, and it has so much meaning incorporate. I'm wondering what inspired you to go so close to the eyes, and how that process, how did you approach people asking them to film their eyes? It's such an intimate thing.
Again, I was reading an essay on surrealist cinema, and in this essay it said something like the characters went to live in a town that's inhabited solely by hands. And that was such a beautiful image. And I changed that to eyes. Also because we're talking about ways of seeing. We're talking about Borges, who's blind. We're talking about things being reflected back at you, seeing yourself, seeing the world in a new way, a pluriverse of seeing, a pluriverse of possibilities and ways of being. So the eyes became very important. And yeah, I just had this image of being lost in a sea of eyes. And it was in Mexico, and I had a really great fixer who is a close friend, and she's a very sweet person, and when she approaches people, it's so tender. And she would approach people and she would say, we really we love your eyes, and we're doing this thing, and can we film them? And as soon as you tell somebody that you see something in their eyes, I mean, there's like a light that happens, and they feel moved, and then I feel moved, and it's like a silent connection that happens. It was really one of the most extraordinary experiences. Yeah, and of course, like you see me, which is sometimes good, and sometimes you're like, okay, there she is again. but yeah, there's so much depth in every look, and so much that you can sort of try to get out of stories, and then sometimes you're looking at the reflection, sometimes that you're looking at the actual eyes, sometimes the eyebrows, sometimes the expression, and that all creates its own sort of world and story, each eye. And initially I had the sequence was much longer, and then everybody was like, no, it's enough. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, you have, I think, 2 or 3 moments that are longer. So both the eyes and the ending, the portal again, the graphics, and I feel like that allows us again to go into a space to maybe drift away, to think of our own dreams and thoughts.
Yeah, that's absolutely, and I think there's something about the eyes that for me invoked that, like, because you stopped actually paying attention to the eyes, and you're sort of
Mhm.
transported somewhere else, and you come back, and everything seems very different. So yeah, hopefully that worked. Yeah.
Yeah, again, it made me think of Apichat Pongverastakul because he likes to have people falling asleep during his dreams. And I like that idea. I like the idea of not being entertained or kept attached to the image, to the sound all the time, and just like this back and forth and letting someone think for a second or 2 or 5 minutes or
Mhm.
so. Yeah, I appreciated those moments. Yes, Camila.
Eva, thank you so much for this absolutely amazing experience. And since we are on the portal, it made me wonder, which I'm sure a lot of people share, what's next for you? What is your next project? What's after this?
After this, we go back to reality.
Whatever that means.
After this, we go to a very specific memory that is sort of stuck in my mind. It's a phone call that happened when I was 11 years old, and that phone call is sort of suspended in my head as a point of fracture. And so I'm going back to sort of rediscover those memories around that phone call. And it's a film that's set in Serbia back in the 90s. It's not about the war, but it's about, as most films are, memory, but how we use memory that's very, very, as we have spoken, faulty and not to be trusted to build narratives. And so the film is structured in this sort of like 11 phone calls. It's all, the phone calls always happens at the same time, at the same day, but the story is different, and it builds to a larger sort of narrative of dislocation or being sort of torn away from whatever, everything, you know. So that's the next film. I've never made a film in Serbia. I've never shot a film on 16 millimeter, so the gentleman will be happy. Yeah, so I think it's going to be an interesting experience.
And you mentioned something about Aleph, that it might be an installation.
Yeah, so I was commissioned by the Thessaloniki Biennale in Greece to transfer Aleph into an installation. So I'm doing that next, and sort of it's going to be a 3-channel installation. Yet to know what that's going to look like, but it'll be good.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
One more thing. I just want to mention, is the mic working still? I just want to mention that Evaporating Borders, Eva's first feature film, is available online on Mimis's website. And yeah, also tomorrow we're going to watch some shorts as well, as she mentioned. Okay.